My husband demanded a divorce and laughed in my face. "You will get absolutely nothing, and I am taking our kids," he threatened. My lawyer screamed at me to fight back, but I silently signed all the papers. He celebrated his easy win. I was laughing inside because he stupidly forgot one massive secret. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to an arrogant partner who completely underestimated your intelligence. The freezing temperature inside the glass-walled conference room of the downtown law firm matched the absolute ice in my husband's eyes. Marcus did not even sit down. He stood over the polished mahogany table and slammed a thick 15-page divorce decree right in front of me. The loud smack echoed through the quiet room, causing my lawyer, David, to flinch. Marcus leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table, and smirked. He wore a brand-new tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car. He looked entirely too pleased with himself. "Sign it," Marcus ordered with a chilling arrogance. "You are going to sign every single page right now. You are getting nothing. No alimony, no child support, no house. I am taking full custody of the kids, and you are going to pack your bags and leave by tomorrow night." "David?" My lawyer instantly jumped to his feet, his face flushed with anger. "This is completely unacceptable," David shouted. "This agreement is entirely predatory. My client is entitled to half of the marital assets and primary custody. You cannot just strip a mother of her rights." Marcus let out a loud, mocking laugh that filled the small room. "Marital assets," he scoffed, rolling his eyes. "What exactly did she contribute to those assets? She is a stay-at-home mom who does absolutely nothing all day but bake cookies and fold laundry. I built my real estate business from the ground up. I worked 70-hour weeks while she sat around watching daytime television. I am the provider. She has not earned a single dime in 7 years. Why should she get half of my hard-earned money? It is pathetic." Marcus' attorney, a slick man named Harrison, sat back in his leather chair and offered a smug, condescending smile. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and looked at David. "My client has a very strong case here," David Harrison said smoothly. "We have already filed the necessary paperwork to expedite this process. If your client decides to fight this in court, we are prepared to drag this out for years. We will bury her in legal fees until she is completely bankrupt. It would be in her best interest to just accept the terms quietly." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, puffing out his chest like a proud peacock. "You cannot touch my money anyway, Maya," he bragged loudly. "I am not an idiot. I saw this coming months ago. I have already liquidated our joint accounts and moved every single penny into my private company. Apex Holdings is completely untouchable. It is an ironclad limited liability company protected by layers of corporate law. Good luck trying to get a judge to crack that open. You are a broke, unemployed housewife taking on a millionaire. You will lose everything." His words hung heavily in the freezing air of the conference room. He was trying to intimidate me into a state of panic. He expected me to cry. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg him not to take my children away. He wanted to see me broken and humiliated in front of these high-powered attorneys. "If you do not sign those papers right now, I will make sure you never see our kids again." Marcus threatened, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "I will destroy your entire life, Maya." David looked at me with sheer panic in his eyes. "Maya, please do not listen to him," David pleaded, placing his hand over the documents. "Do not sign this. We can fight this in court. We can expose him for hiding marital assets." I stared at the thick stack of papers and then looked up at Marcus. His smug, confident face made me sick to my stomach, but I kept my expression perfectly blank. I did not shed a single tear. I did not raise my voice. I reached into my purse and pulled out my silver pen. Without a word, I clicked the pen open. Marcus smiled victoriously as I began to sign my name on the first solid printed page. I was officially giving up everything, but he had no clue what was coming. David reached across the mahogany table and grabbed my wrist before I could move to the second page. Maya, what are you doing? He hissed, his voice thick with panic. If you sign the rest of these pages, you are legally waiving your right to every single asset acquired during your 7-year marriage. You are giving him full custody without a fight. You are walking away with absolutely zero safety net. I gently pulled my wrist out of his grip. I kept my face perfectly smooth. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair and let out a loud, arrogant bark of laughter. Listen to your overpriced lawyer, Maya, he taunted. You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic life, but I am not going to stop you. Go ahead and sign away. You were never smart enough to handle real money anyway. That is why you gave up your little accounting job to stay home. You could not handle the pressure of the real corporate world. I paused, my pen hovering over the thick stack of legal documents. I looked up and met his arrogant gaze. It is funny you bring up my old accounting job, Marcus, I said, my voice steady and quiet. You seem to forget who built the financial foundation of your entire real estate empire. You forget who spent endless nights fixing your disastrous tax returns when you were just a struggling broker dodging the IRS 6 years ago. You forget who actually set up the corporate structures you are now so proudly hiding your money behind. I was the one who balanced every ledger while you were out playing big-shot golfing with clients. Marcus rolled his eyes and waved his hand dismissively. That is ancient history, he scoffed, taking a sip of his sparkling water. You filed a few tax forms 6 years ago. Big deal. Anybody could have done that. I am the one who closed the multi-million-dollar deals. I am the one who built Apex Holdings into a $15 million powerhouse. You are just a glorified secretary who decided to get pregnant and quit because the work was too hard. Stop living in the past and sign the damn papers so I can get on with my life. Harrison. His smug lawyer tapped his expensive gold watch. We do not have all day, he added impatiently, looking from me to David. If your client is going to sign David, she needs to finish now, or we withdraw this generous settlement offer and see you in family court. We will request that she pay all of our legal fees due to her wasting our time. David looked at me pleadingly, his face red with frustration. Maya, please let me file an injunction, he begged. Let me subpoena his business records right now. We can easily prove he is hiding marital funds in Apex Holdings. We can tear his little corporate shield apart piece by piece. It will take time, but you will get what you rightfully deserve. You are a mother, and you deserve to keep your children in their family home. I looked at David, feeling a brief moment of sympathy for him. He was a good lawyer, but he did not know the massive secret I was holding. He did not know that fighting Marcus in court over marital assets would actually ruin my ultimate plan. I needed Marcus to believe he had won completely and utterly. I needed him to walk out of this room feeling like the smartest and most powerful man on earth. Thank you, David, but I know exactly what I am doing, I replied softly, without breaking eye contact with Marcus. I turned my attention back to the stack of paper. I moved my hand deliberately and signed the second page, then the third. The room fell entirely silent, except for the scratching of my silver pen against the crisp white paper. I did not hesitate for a single second. I did not let a single tear fall from my eyes. I moved through the remaining 13 pages with the cold precision of a machine. Every signature was a nail in his financial coffin, but he was too blind by his own ego to see it. I reached the final page of the heavy document. It contained the custody agreement, the asset forfeiture clause, and the complete waiver of alimony. I signed my name one last time with a heavy, decisive stroke. I placed the pen down on the glass table and pushed the stack of papers across the polished wood toward Marcus. He grabbed the documents, hungrily pulling them toward his chest. He flipped through the pages, frantically checking every single signature line to make sure I did not miss one. When he reached the last page, a massive, sickening grin spread across his face, revealing all of his teeth. He actually started clapping his hands together. He clapped loudly and slowly, mocking me right in front of the two lawyers. Well, I have to admit I did not think you would actually be this stupid. Marcus sneered, shaking his head. You just signed away your kids and your future because you were too weak to fight me. You are walking out of here with absolutely nothing. Not a single dime to your name. I hope you enjoy living in a tiny, cramped apartment while my new girlfriend and I raise my children in a $3 million penthouse downtown. You played yourself, Maya. You really did. I stood up from my chair and smoothed the front of my dress. I looked down at him, still smiling that same calm, unsettling smile. Congratulations, Marcus, I said quietly. You got exactly what you asked for today. Marcus did not even acknowledge my words. He was already pulling his brand new phone from his suit pocket. He dialed a number and put it on speakerphone right there in the middle of the conference table. The line rang twice before his mother Eleanor answered. Marcus, my sweet boy, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with anticipation. Tell me the good news. Marcus leaned back and propped his expensive Italian leather shoes onto the edge of the mahogany table. It is done, Mom, he announced triumphantly. The dead weight has officially been cut loose. I won. It was a flawless victory. I kept 100% of my wealth, just like I promised. She signed everything without even a fight. I could hear Eleanor gasp with delight on the other end of the line. Oh, thank goodness, Eleanor cried out. I have been praying for this day, Marcus. Our family worked too hard to let some lazy woman walk away with your fortune. You protected your assets exactly like a smart businessman should. Now you can finally find a woman who actually matches your high society status. Marcus laughed, a deep, booming sound that echoed off the glass walls. Absolutely, Mom, he agreed. Everything is locked up tight in Apex Holdings. She cannot touch a single dime. I will call you back in a few minutes. I need to take out the trash. He ended the call and dropped his feet back to the floor. He looked at me with pure disgust. You heard my mother, Maya, he sneered. The charade is over. You have exactly 48 hours to pack up your cheap clothes and get out of my house. I do not want to see your face when I come back from my weekend trip. Leave the keys on the kitchen counter, and do not even think about taking any of the expensive furniture. You bought none of it. David, my lawyer, was shaking his head in absolute defeat. He started packing his briefcase, his hands trembling slightly with frustration. He thought I had completely surrendered. He thought I was just a terrified, beaten-down housewife who lacked the spine to stand up to a wealthy bully. He looked at me with deep pity, but I did not offer him any comfort or explanation. Some secrets are too valuable to share until the exact right moment. I picked up my leather purse from the floor and placed the strap over my shoulder. I did not look at Harrison, the smug attorney who was busy organizing the signed documents into neat little piles. I did not look at Marcus, who was busy checking his reflection in his phone screen. I turned around and walked out of the freezing conference room in total silence. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, cutting off the sound of Marcus bragging to his lawyer about the penthouse he was planning to buy. I walked down the long carpeted hallway of the law firm. My heels clicked rhythmically against the floorboards. The receptionist gave me a sympathetic smile as I passed the front desk, but I kept my face entirely neutral. I pressed the silver button for the elevator and waited. My heart was not racing. My hands were not shaking. In fact, I felt a profound sense of peace settling over my entire body. The heavy chains of a toxic 7-year marriage had just been legally severed. Marcus thought he had trapped me, but he had actually just handed me the keys to my absolute freedom. He was so consumed by his own ego that he never saw the trap closing around him. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The metal doors slid open, and I stepped inside the empty car. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, sealing me in a completely private space, I finally allowed a genuine smile to spread across my face. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I bypassed my messages from friends and family and opened a secure encrypted banking application. I selected the direct contact line for my private wealth manager, Jonathan. My fingers moved quickly across the screen, typing out a single chilling command. Initiate total asset liquidation for Apex Holdings. Transfer all funds to my primary offshore trust. Execute immediately. I stared at the glowing screen for a brief second before hitting send. A tiny notification appeared confirming the message was delivered. A second later, the notification turned blue, indicating Jonathan had read it. 3 seconds later, a single word popped up on my screen. Confirmed. I lowered the phone and let out a long breath of pure satisfaction. Marcus built his entire identity on his supposed financial genius. He thought his limited liability company was an impenetrable fortress, but he had been so blinded by his own arrogance and his desperate need to hide money from me that he never bothered to look closely at the original incorporation documents from 6 years ago. He forgot whose social security number was used to establish the company when he was hiding from the IRS. He forgot who was legally listed as the sole president and 100% shareholder. By forcing me to sign a legally binding divorce decree that stated whoever legally owns the company entity retains 100% of its assets. Marcus had just willingly and legally gifted me his entire $15 million fortune. He was completely blind to his own ruin. I slipped my phone back into my purse and drove straight to the upscale suburban neighborhood where my mother-in-law Eleanor lived. The drive gave me exactly 20 minutes to smooth my expression and lock away the immense satisfaction bubbling inside me. Marcus had demanded I leave his house in 48 hours, but my only immediate concern was picking up my 7-year-old son Leo and my 5-year-old daughter Mia. I parked my car on the pristine cobblestone driveway. Before I even reached the front door, I could hear the loud thump of bass-heavy music coming from the backyard. I walked around the side of the sprawling brick house and pushed open the heavy wooden gate. What I saw made me stop dead in my tracks. The expansive backyard was decorated like a holiday weekend. Several of Marcus' cousins and aunts were lounging on expensive patio furniture, holding plastic cups filled with liquor. A massive grill was smoking in the corner, and a ridiculous banner hung across the back deck that read "Finally Free" in bright gold letters. They were not just having a family barbecue. They were actively throwing a party to celebrate my divorce. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Marcus had barely left the law firm, and his family was already drinking to my supposed downfall. I scanned the yard looking for my children, but I did not see them among the crowd of laughing adults. "Well, look who decided to crash the party!" A loud voice called out, cutting through the music. The chatter in the yard instantly died down. Eleanor marched across the manicured lawn holding a glass of iced tea. She wore a perfectly pressed floral dress and a look of absolute triumph on her face. She stopped a few feet away from me, looking me up and down with blatant disgust. "I suppose Marcus gave you the bad news," Eleanor said, her voice loud enough for every single family member to hear. "Actually, I should call it good news. My son finally woke up and dropped the dead weight holding him back." I stood perfectly still, keeping my hands relaxed at my sides. Eleanor thrived on drama. She wanted me to scream and cry in front of her sisters so she could point her finger and call me unstable. I was not going to give her the satisfaction. "We all knew you were never good enough for him," Eleanor continued, taking a step closer. "You manipulated him into marriage when he was young and naive. You quit your job the second you got pregnant so you could live off his hard work. You sat in that beautiful house he bought spending his money while bringing absolutely nothing to the table. And now he has legally outsmarted you. You are leaving with nothing just like you came with nothing." The aunts and cousins muttered in agreement, sipping their drinks and glaring at me. It was a perfectly orchestrated public execution of my character. They wanted me humiliated. They wanted me broken. I looked directly into Eleanor's eyes and offered a polite, indifferent smile. "I am here to pick up Leo and Mia," I said, my voice completely level and calm. "Please tell them it is time to go home." Eleanor frowned, clearly disappointed that I had not erupted into a screaming match. "You do not get to come into my yard and issue orders," she snapped, placing her hands on her hips. "The kids are inside playing video games. They are perfectly fine here with their real family. You can go back to your empty house and start packing your cheap bags. Marcus told me you have 48 hours to get out. I would suggest you start looking for a minimum wage job, Maya, because you are going to need it to afford a tiny apartment." I did not flinch. I took a step forward, intending to walk past her and go inside the house to get my children. Immediately, two of Marcus' older cousins stepped directly into my path, blocking the sliding glass door. They crossed their arms, looking at me like I was a trespasser on their property. The hostility in the air was thick and suffocating. They were actively trying to provoke me into a physical altercation so they could call the police and claim I was a threat to my own kids. I stopped walking and took a slow, deliberate breath. "I am their mother," I said, clearly projecting my voice so everyone could hear. "And I am taking them home right now. Step aside. I am not playing games with anyone here, and you have absolutely no legal right to keep my son and daughter away from me today or ever." The two cousins shifted uncomfortably, looking toward Eleanor for direction. Before Eleanor could issue another command, the sliding glass door slid open and Brittany stepped out onto the patio. Brittany was married to Marcus' older brother, Derek. She was a tall, slender blonde woman who always wore a patronizing smile, like she was observing a charity project. She held a crystal wine glass in one hand and her limited edition Hermes bag casually draped over her arm. She walked down the wooden steps and gracefully placed a hand on one of the cousins' shoulders, signaling him to step aside. "Oh, Maya, there is no need to get so loud and defensive," Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "You are making everyone uncomfortable. We are just having a peaceful family gathering. Please try to keep your voice down. We do not want the neighbors to think there is a domestic dispute going on. It is such a lovely afternoon." I stared at her, taking in her perfectly styled hair and her expensive designer sundress. Brittany had always specialized in these little subtle attacks. She weaponized her politeness to make me look like the angry, aggressive woman while she played the calm, rational peacemaker. "I am perfectly calm, Brittany," I replied evenly. "I am just here for my children." Brittany took a slow sip of her white wine and sighed, looking at me with feigned pity. "I know this is a difficult day for you, Maya. Truly I do. But you have to be realistic about this situation. Marcus is a highly successful real estate broker now. He is entering a completely different echelon of society. He attends charity galas and high-stakes corporate dinners. He needs a high-society modern woman by his side, someone who understands corporate networking and country club etiquette." She gestured vaguely toward my simple outfit. "You are a wonderful mother, Maya, but let us be honest. Your world is baking pies and cooking soul food on Sundays. You never really fit in with this family or Marcus' ambitions. You always preferred to stay home and play house while he was out building an empire. He simply outgrew you. It happens. You should be grateful he provided for you as long as he did." My jaw clenched, but I forced my facial muscles to remain relaxed. The sheer classist arrogance of her words was nauseating, but I let her keep talking. When arrogant people talk too much, they eventually slip up and reveal things they should keep hidden. Besides, Brittany continued, leaning closer to me, conspiratorially, "It is much better for everyone if you just pack up quietly and move into a smaller apartment. It is a shame about the full custody arrangement. But at least Marcus was generous enough to let you walk away without saddling you with his business debts. I mean, the fact that you agreed to sign over all your legal rights to Apex Holdings without demanding a forensic accounting was very mature of you. It makes a clean break." The backyard suddenly felt incredibly quiet. The music was still playing and the cousins were still whispering, but all of my focus zeroed in on Brittany. My mind raced, piecing together the information she had just casually dropped. The divorce settlement had been finalized less than an hour ago in a private law office miles away. Marcus had only called his mother, and he only bragged broadly about keeping his wealth. He never mentioned the specific legal waiver regarding Apex Holdings. He never mentioned the full custody arrangement details on the phone. Only 4 people in the world knew the exact wording of that contract: me, Marcus, and our 2 lawyers. Yet here was Brittany confidently quoting the specific terms of the settlement. I remembered Marcus' arrogant taunt in the conference room. "I hope you enjoy living in a tiny, cramped apartment while my new girlfriend and I raise my children in a $3 million penthouse." He had said new girlfriend, not just a random date, someone he was already planning a life with, someone who knew the intimate details of his finances. I looked at Brittany. I looked at the way she held herself, the way she defended Marcus with such passionate ownership. The truth hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Marcus was not just having an affair. He was having an affair with his own brother's wife. Brittany was the new modern woman he was replacing me with. She was the one he was buying the penthouse for. The betrayal ran so much deeper than I had ever imagined. They were brazenly flaunting their secret right in front of the entire family while Derek was oblivious. "Where is Derek, by the way?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. "I find it strange that he is not here celebrating with the rest of you." Brittany waved her hand dismissively, her diamond rings catching the sunlight. "Oh, Derek is at the office working late again. You know how he is. He just does not have the same relentless drive and vision as Marcus. Marcus knows how to make big moves and secure his future. Derek is too cautious. It takes a certain kind of brilliant mind to execute a corporate restructure like Marcus just did." She smiled warmly as she spoke about my husband. The adoration in her eyes was unmistakable. She thought she was so clever standing there sipping her wine and gloating about stealing my life. She thought she had secured the ultimate prize, a multi-million-dollar real estate mogul who was completely legally detached from his boring housewife. She had no idea she had just hitched her wagon to a man who was now legally bankrupt. I filed this massive piece of leverage away in my mind. I was going to use it to completely dismantle her perfect little world. I did not scream. I did not throw my hands up or burst into tears the way Eleanor was so clearly hoping I would. Instead, I took a slow step forward, closing the distance between Brittany and me. I let my eyes wander over her carefully curated outfit. I noticed the way she held her posture, the way she angled her body defensively, as if she was protecting a prize she had just stolen. And then I heard the heavy footsteps coming down the wooden stairs of the deck. Marcus walked out of the house holding a fresh glass of expensive bourbon. He stopped right next to Brittany. He did not stand a respectful distance away like a brother-in-law should. He stood so close their shoulders were practically touching. It was a subtle physical claim, an arrogant display of his new life. He looked at me with absolute contempt, his chest puffed out in his tailored suit. "I see you are still here, Maya," he said loudly, drawing the attention of every single person in the backyard. "I told you to pack your things, not come crashing my family gathering. You are embarrassing yourself." Eleanor nodded vigorously from the sidelines, sipping her iced tea with a smug expression. "See, I told her to leave Marcus, but she refused to listen," Eleanor chimed in. "She is just trying to cause a scene because she knows she lost everything." I looked at Marcus, and then I looked at Brittany. They really thought they were the smartest people in the world. They thought they had perfectly orchestrated my downfall and secured their own wealthy future without a single consequence. Marcus raised his left hand to take a sip of his bourbon. The afternoon sunlight caught the brilliant face of a brand-new diamond-encrusted Rolex watch on his wrist. It was a massive, flashy piece of jewelry that practically screamed new money. My eyes drifted from his watch down to the limited edition Hermes bag draped over Brittany's arm. That bag cost more than some people's cars. They were already spending the millions they thought were safely hidden away from me. I let a soft, genuine smile touch my lips. It was not a smile of defeat or bitterness. It was the smile of a woman watching two fools dancing on the edge of a cliff. I tilted my head and looked directly into Brittany's eyes. "Beautiful bag." "Brittany," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the suddenly quiet yard. "The leather looks incredibly pristine. Let us just hope the credit card you bought it with is not tied to Marcus' business accounts." The reaction was instantaneous. Marcus lowered his glass, his jaw tightening. Brittany stiffened, her patronizing smile faltering for the very first time. A deep, suffocating silence fell over the entire backyard. The cousins stopped whispering. Eleanor lowered her glass of iced tea, staring at me with sudden confusion. Nobody understood exactly what my words meant, but the absolute calm in my voice sent a visible chill through the crowd. Why would I mention the business accounts if I had just signed them away? Why was I smiling at the woman who was sleeping with my husband? Marcus opened his mouth to insult me again, but the words seemed to die in his throat. He looked down at his watch and then over at Brittany's bag, a flicker of genuine uncertainty crossing his arrogant face. He had expected me to scream about the affair. He had expected me to beg for my marriage. By completely ignoring his infidelity and targeting his financial lifeline, instead, I had completely knocked him off balance. Do not worry, Marcus. I continued, my voice smooth and unbothered. I am not going to ruin your little celebration. You both deserve exactly what is coming to you. Before either of them could recover from the shock, I stepped around them. The two cousins who had blocked my path earlier instinctively moved out of my way. The power dynamic in the yard had entirely shifted in a matter of seconds. I walked up the wooden stairs and slid the glass door open. The air conditioning hit my face as I stepped into the familiar living room. Leo and Mia were sitting on the expensive leather sofa, playing a racing game on the television. I walked over and gently tapped Leo's shoulder. "Time to go home, guys," I said softly. They paused their game and grabbed their small backpacks without argument. I took my daughter's hand and led them out the front door, completely bypassing the backyard. I did not look back. I did not need to. I knew exactly what I was leaving behind. I was leaving a yard full of traitors drowning in a suffocating silence. The very next morning, while I was enjoying a breakfast with my children, Marcus was already rushing to spend money that no longer belonged to him. He and Brittany had scheduled a private viewing of a $3 million penthouse in a high-rise building downtown. They were no longer bothering to hide their affair from the public eye. Derek was out of town on a business trip, completely unaware that his wife was currently holding his brother's hand and picking out countertops for their new love nest. The penthouse was massive. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Marcus strutted across the hardwood floors like he owned the entire city. He wore a crisp designer polo shirt and his diamond Rolex, while Brittany clung to his arm, practically purring at the sight of the private rooftop terrace. "This is exactly what you deserve," Brittany, Marcus said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "No more settling for Derek's boring suburban lifestyle. You are going to live like a queen up here. We can host high society charity dinners on this balcony. My real estate clients will be incredibly impressed when they see this place." Brittany traced her fingers along the edge of the massive kitchen island. "It is absolutely perfect, Marcus," she cooed. "It is so modern and sophisticated. Not at all like that tired, depressing house you shared with Maya. I am so glad you finally got rid of her. She would have completely ruined the aesthetic of this kitchen." The real estate agent, a man named Julian, walked into the room holding a sleek tablet. He offered them both a polite smile. "It truly is a spectacular property," Julian said smoothly. "However, the owner is requesting a rather substantial deposit to secure the lease today. We require first and last month's rent, plus a security deposit, which comes to exactly $150,000. Marcus let out a loud, arrogant laugh and patted his chest pocket. "Do not worry about the money," Julian, Marcus bragged loudly, leaning against the expensive counter. "I am not some amateur buyer scraping together a mortgage. I have millions in liquid cash ready to go. I just finalized my divorce yesterday, and it was an absolute masterclass in asset protection." Julian raised an eyebrow, looking mildly amused by Marcus' desperate need to show off. "Is that so, sir?" Julian asked politely. "Oh, absolutely," Marcus continued, puffing out his chest. "My dumb ex-wife signed away her rights to everything. She was just a stay-at-home mom who did not understand the first thing about corporate structures. For the last 5 years, I have been funneling every massive commission check I earned directly into my private limited liability company called Apex Holdings. I kept my personal checking accounts completely empty, so when the divorce papers were drawn up, it looked like I had nothing to split." Brittany giggled and rested her head on Marcus' shoulder. "He is an absolute genius, Julian," she chimed in. "He drafted a legal clause that said whoever legally owned the business kept 100% of the assets. His ex-wife just blindly signed it without fighting because she was too intimidated. She walked away with zero and he kept all $15 million safely hidden away. Julian offered a smile, clearly unimpressed by a man openly bragging about defrauding the mother of his children. "Well, congratulations on your financial maneuvering, sir," Julian said dryly. "If you are ready to move forward, we can head down to the leasing office in the lobby. I can run your card for the $150,000 deposit, and we can get the keys transferred to your name immediately." "Let us do it," Marcus said eagerly, grabbing Brittany's hand. They took the private glass elevator down to the luxurious marble lobby. Marcus felt invincible. He genuinely believed he had successfully cheated the legal system and me out of a secure future. He walked into the glass-walled leasing office and sat down in the plush leather chair across from Julian. Brittany sat right next to him, crossing her long legs and smiling triumphantly. Julian tapped his tablet a few times and pulled up the payment gateway. He placed a sleek black card reader on the desk. "You can just insert your card whenever you are ready, sir," Julian instructed. Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out his heavy black corporate card. He slid it into the machine, boasting loudly, "This card has absolutely no limit. Go ahead and run it." Brittany squeezed his arm, her eyes shining with pure greed. They both stared at the small screen, waiting for the approval message to finalize their perfect morning. The small screen on the card reader flashed a bright white light, followed by a harsh, low beep. The word "declined" appeared in bold red letters across the digital display. Julian blinked and looked down at the machine. "It appears there was an issue with the transaction, sir," Julian said, his voice maintaining a polite professional tone. "Sometimes these high-limit corporate cards trigger an automatic fraud alert for unusually large purchases. You might just need to call your bank to authorize the charge." Marcus scoffed loudly, waving his hand in the air like swatting a fly. "That is completely ridiculous," he said, pulling the heavy metal card out of the reader with a sharp yank. "I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on that card. They know exactly who I am. The banking system is just incredibly slow today." "Do not worry about it, Julian. I have plenty of other ways to pay for this penthouse." Marcus opened his expensive leather wallet and pulled out a shiny platinum credit card. "This is my personal emergency card," he boasted, sliding it aggressively into the machine. "It is tied directly to my private savings account. Go ahead and run it for the full $150,000. I do not have time to sit around waiting for bank authorizations. I have a very busy afternoon planned with my beautiful girlfriend, and we need to get these keys now." Brittany smiled and rubbed his shoulder, but her eyes darted nervously toward the real estate agent. She was clearly eager to get the transaction over with to secure her new luxurious lifestyle. Julian tapped his tablet again, resetting the payment gateway. The machine processed the platinum card for a few tense seconds. The lobby outside the glass office was quiet, making the silence inside the room feel incredibly heavy. Then came the same harsh, low beep. The screen flashed red once again, displaying the exact same word, "declined." Julian's polite smile completely vanished. He pulled the card reader back across the polished wooden desk and cleared his throat. "I am sorry, sir, but this card has also been declined," Julian said, his tone noticeably colder and much less accommodating. "Perhaps you should step outside and contact your financial institution to resolve this. We have several other qualified clients scheduled to view the penthouse this afternoon, and I absolutely cannot hold the property without a cleared deposit." Marcus' face turned a dark, angry shade of red. The veins in his neck began to bulge against his crisp polo shirt. He slammed his fist down on the desk, causing the card reader to rattle against the wood. "There is absolutely nothing wrong with my accounts," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small glass office. "Your machine is obviously broken, Julian. Do you have any idea who you are dealing with right now? I am Marcus Brooks. I own Apex Holdings. I just finalized a divorce settlement yesterday that left me with $15 million in completely liquid assets. I could buy this entire building in cash if I wanted to." Brittany shifted uncomfortably in her chair, looking around to see if anyone in the lobby was watching them. Several people were now staring through the glass walls. "Marcus, honey, maybe you should just check your banking app," she suggested softly, trying to calm him down and save face. Just show him the balance so we can get this sorted out and make him run the card again. I really want to start picking out furniture for the terrace today. Marcus glared at the real estate agent and pulled his brand new smartphone from his pocket. Fine, he snapped violently, swiping at the screen. I will show you exactly how much money I have, Julian. Then I expect a massive apology and a significant discount on the first month's rent for this ridiculous inconvenience and your terrible attitude. He aggressively tapped the screen of his phone, opening his secure banking application. The blue loading circle spun in the center of the screen. Marcus held the phone up so both Brittany and Julian could clearly see the bright display. Watch closely, he gloated, his ego demanding full attention. You are about to see a corporate account with over $15 million sitting right there ready to be spent. The application finally loaded, displaying his main financial dashboard. Marcus stared at the screen, ready to smirk at Julian's shocked expression, but his arrogant smile froze and then completely collapsed. He blinked rapidly, rubbing his eyes as if his vision was playing cruel tricks on him. The large, bold numbers at the top of the screen did not say 15 million. They said $0 and 0 cents. A cold sweat instantly broke out across his forehead. His hands began to tremble so violently that the phone shook. No, he whispered, his voice cracking with sudden terror. No, this is impossible. The app is glitching. This is just a stupid software glitch. The network must be down. He frantically tapped the screen, opening his personal checking account. $0. He backed out and opened his high-yield savings account. $0. He navigated to the Apex Holdings corporate portal, the untouchable fortress where he had hidden all of his wealth from the divorce. The screen loaded, displaying a completely empty ledger. Total available balance $0 and 0 cents. Every single account had been completely drained. Every penny he had hidden, every commission check he had hoarded, every dollar he thought he had secured, was gone. The phone slipped from his trembling hands and clattered loudly onto the wooden desk. Brittany leaned forward, looking at the screen. Marcus, she asked, her voice high and panicked. Marcus, what is going on? Where is all the money? Marcus could not answer. He sat frozen in the chair, his mouth open, struggling to pull air into his lungs, as the catastrophic reality of his situation finally crushed him. Marcus snatched his phone off the wooden desk and bolted out of the leather chair. He did not say a single word to Julian. He did not even look at Brittany, who was now frantically calling his name and demanding an explanation. He sprinted out of the glass office and ran across the marble lobby, pushing past a group of startled residents. He burst through the revolving glass doors and sprinted to his car, leaving his supposed future wife completely humiliated and stranded in front of a real estate agent who was already calling security. His hands were shaking so violently that he could barely get the key into the ignition. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal and sped out of the parking garage. His mind was racing through 1,000 different scenarios, trying to find a logical explanation. He convinced himself that he had been the victim of a massive cyber attack. Someone must have hacked his accounts. The banking system must have flagged his divorce settlement and frozen his assets pending a review. There was no way the money was actually gone. He was Marcus Brooks. He was a financial genius. He did not lose. He swerved through downtown traffic, ignoring red lights and blaring horns, until he reached the main branch of his bank. He parked illegally right in front of the building and stormed inside. The polished bank lobby was quiet, filled with wealthy clients conducting business. Marcus shattered that peace instantly. He marched straight up to the first available teller, a young woman who looked terrified by his aggressive approach. "Where is my money?" he screamed, slamming his fist down on the marble counter. "Where is my $15 million? Somebody completely drained my accounts, and I demand you fix it right now." The young teller jumped back, her eyes wide with fear. "Sir, please lower your voice," she stammered, typing nervously on her keyboard. "If you can just give me your account number or your identification, I can look into this for you." Marcus threw his wallet onto the counter, spilling his driver license and credit cards everywhere. "Do you know who I am?" he yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "I am one of your biggest clients. My company is Apex Holdings. Someone committed massive wire fraud yesterday and stole my entire life savings. I want the police called. I want the fraud department on the phone right this second." The loud commotion caught the attention of the branch manager, a distinguished older man in a gray suit who quickly rushed out of his corner office. He approached the counter holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Mr. Brooks, please calm down," the manager said firmly but politely. "You are causing a massive disruption. Please step into my private office and we will figure out exactly what happened to your accounts." Marcus snatched his cards off the counter and stormed into the manager's office, pacing back and forth across the carpet like a caged animal. The manager closed the door, shutting out the stares of the other clients. He sat behind his large desk and pulled up Marcus' profile on his secure computer monitor. "Listen to me very carefully," Marcus threatened, leaning over the desk and pointing a shaking finger at the manager. "I finalized my divorce yesterday. I moved every single penny I own into my corporate accounts to protect it. Now the app says my balance is zero. If your bank lets some hacker steal my $15 million, I will sue this entire institution into the ground." The manager typed a few commands into his keyboard and studied the screen for a long, tense moment. He did not look panicked. He did not reach for the phone to call the fraud department. Instead, a look of deep pity crossed his face. He folded his hands neatly on top of his desk and looked up at Marcus. "There was no hack, Mr. Brooks," the manager said, his voice perfectly calm. "There was no fraud either. The funds were not stolen." "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded, his voice cracking with hysteria. "The money is gone." "The money was legally withdrawn," the manager explained. "Yesterday afternoon at exactly 4 o'clock, our wealth management division received a direct and heavily authenticated order to completely liquidate all assets tied to Apex Holdings. The funds were securely wired to a private offshore trust account. The transaction was fully authorized and legally binding." "Authorized by who?" Marcus screamed, spit flying from his lips. "I am the owner of Apex Holdings. I never authorized any wire transfer." The manager sighed and turned his large computer monitor around, so it was directly facing Marcus. He tapped his pen against the screen, highlighting a specific legal document attached to the corporate account. "Sir, I am looking at the official articles of incorporation for Apex Holdings," the manager stated firmly. "You are listed merely as an authorized signer on the checking account. You are not the owner. The sole legal owner, the president, and the CEO of the company who authorized the withdrawal yesterday is Maya Brooks." Marcus stared at the bright computer screen. His ex-wife's name was printed clearly in bold black letters right at the top of the state registration document. He had been depositing his money into her company for 6 years. Every single real estate commission, every massive bonus, every dollar he thought he was hiding from her had gone straight into an entity she completely controlled. His genius plan to protect his assets was actually the mechanism of his own destruction. The silence in the bank manager's office was so absolute that Marcus could hear the ticking of the wall clock. He leaned closer to the computer monitor, his breath fogging the edge of the glass screen. His eyes darted back and forth across the digital document, reading his ex-wife's name over and over again. Maya Brooks, President, Chief Executive Officer, sole shareholder. The words burned themselves into his retinas. He tried to speak, but his throat was completely dry. His mind forcefully dragged him back to the freezing conference room of the law firm just 24 hours ago. He remembered the exact wording of the divorce settlement he had paid his expensive lawyer to draft. He remembered standing over the mahogany table proudly demanding that Maya sign the paper. He remembered the specific clause he had maliciously inserted to ensure she could never touch his supposed wealth. Whoever legally owns the company entity retains 100% of its assets. That was the trap he had laid for her. He had been so arrogant, so absolutely certain that Apex Holdings belonged to him because he was the one depositing the checks. He never bothered to check the original incorporation paperwork from 6 years ago. He had demanded she sign away her rights to his assets, but legally he had just signed away his rights to hers. By forcing her to agree to that predatory clause, he had completely forfeited his ability to dispute the funds in family court. He had handed her $15 million on a silver platter, wrapped in an ironclad legal contract. The realization hit him like a freight train. He was broke. He was legally, undeniably broke. The veins in his temples throbbed violently as the sheer magnitude of his own stupidity crushed him. "This cannot be happening," Marcus whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and rising rage. "This is a mistake. She tricked me. She committed fraud. You need to reverse that wire transfer right now." The bank manager shook his head, his expression hardening. "I cannot do that," Mr. Brooks, the manager, replied calmly but firmly. "As I just explained, the transfer was initiated by the sole legal owner of the account. It was a completely lawful transaction. There is no fraud here. In fact, the only irregularity is that you have been operating under the assumption that you owned an entity you did not legally possess. If you have a dispute regarding the ownership of these assets, you need to take it up with your divorce attorney and the family court system. The bank is no longer involved." The dismissal in the manager's voice was the final spark that ignited the powder keg of Marcus' ego. A primal scream ripped from his throat, echoing loudly through the private office. He grabbed the heavy leather guest chair he had been sitting in and hurled it across the room. It smashed into the wall, taking a framed painting down with a loud crash. "Mr. Brooks," the manager shouted, jumping up from his desk and backing away. Marcus did not stop. His vision went completely red. He swept his arm violently across the large wooden desk, sending the keyboard, the pen holder, and a stack of files flying across the carpet. He grabbed the heavy glass paperweight and slammed it down onto the desk, cracking the polished wood. "You are all useless," he roared, his voice raw and echoing with madness. "You let that stupid housewife steal my entire life. I built that empire. I made that money. It belongs to me." Two bank security guards suddenly burst through the office door, their hands resting on their utility belts. "Sir, you need to step away from the desk right now," one of the guards commanded, stepping between Marcus and the terrified branch manager. "If you do not calm down and leave this building immediately, we will contact the police and press charges for property damage." Marcus stood panting heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined polo shirt. He looked at the two armed guards and then at the destroyed office. The reality of his situation was a bitter pill that was choking him. He had no money to pay for the penthouse. He had no money to pay his expensive lawyer. He had no money to maintain his lavish lifestyle or impress his new girlfriend. He was a complete fraud, and Maya had exposed him perfectly. He pointed a shaking finger at the manager and then stormed toward the door, shoving his way past the security guards. "I will destroy her!" Marcus screamed as he marched through the bank lobby, ignoring the shocked stares of the wealthy clients he had so desperately wanted to impress. "I will drag her into court, and I will destroy her completely now." I was standing in the center of the living room, carefully wrapping a fragile picture frame in bubble wrap. The house was quiet. The children were at school, and I was taking my time packing only my personal belongings. I had already arranged for a moving truck to come the following morning to take my things to a beautiful rental property I had secured weeks ago. I was at complete peace. Then the sudden violent screech of tires tearing into the driveway shattered the quiet afternoon. I looked out the large front window and saw Marcus' car slam into park half on the grass. Right behind him, two white and blue police cruisers pulled up their red and blue lights, flashing silently, reflecting off the glass of the front door. Marcus threw his car door open and practically fell out. His tailored suit was a wrinkled mess, and his face was twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. He did not wait for the police officers to get out of their vehicles. He sprinted up the concrete walkway and began pounding his fists violently against the heavy wooden front door. "Open the door, Maya!" he screamed, his voice echoing down the quiet suburban street. Open this door, right now, you thief! I know you are in there. The force of his pounding shook the picture frames hanging in the hallway. I placed the bubble wrap down on the coffee table and smoothed the front of my shirt. I did not panic. I had anticipated this exact reaction. Marcus was a man who solved all of his problems through intimidation and sheer volume. He thought bringing the authorities would terrify me into submission. He thought a uniform and a badge would make me crumble. I picked up a crisp manila folder resting on the kitchen counter and walked slowly toward the entryway. Through the frosted glass panels, I could see the silhouettes of 2 police officers hurrying up the steps, pulling Marcus back from the door. "Sir, you need to step back," an officer commanded sternly. "Let us handle this." "She stole $15 million from me," Marcus yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "She hacked my corporate accounts and committed massive wire fraud. She is a criminal. Kick the door down and arrest her right now." I reached out and turned the deadbolt. I pulled the heavy door open and stood calmly in the doorway. The scene on my front porch was chaotic. Marcus was red-faced and sweating heavily, pointing a shaking finger at me. The 2 police officers stood on either side of him, looking incredibly tense. Their hands were resting near their utility belts, clearly expecting to walk into a violent domestic dispute. Instead, they were met with a woman standing peacefully in her own foyer holding a single folder. I did not look like a frantic criminal caught in the act. I looked like a mother who had just been interrupted while doing household chores. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, my voice soft and perfectly level. "Is there a problem here?" The stark contrast between my calm and Marcus' screaming hysteria immediately shifted the energy on the porch. The lead officer, a tall man with a serious expression, took a step forward and cleared his throat. He looked me up and down, confused by my composed demeanor. "Ma'am, we received a frantic call from this gentleman claiming you committed grand larceny." The officer explained, his tone cautious. "He is alleging that you unlawfully accessed his private corporate accounts and transferred a very large sum of money without his authorization. These are very serious federal allegations." "Arrest her!" Marcus screamed, lunging forward slightly before the second officer pushed him back. "Put her in handcuffs. She stole everything I have." I looked at Marcus with pity and absolute boredom. I did not raise my voice to shout back at him. I did not desperately try to defend my character to the police. Shouting matches only validate the crazy person making the accusations. I turned my attention back to the lead officer and offered a polite, cooperative smile. "I understand why he is upset, officer," I said smoothly. "Losing that much money would make anyone a little hysterical. However, there has been a massive misunderstanding here. I did not steal anything from my ex-husband. In fact, I have not accessed any of his personal bank accounts at all." "She is lying!" Marcus roared, spit flying from his mouth. "Apex Holdings! She drained Apex Holdings!" I tapped my finger gently against the manila folder I was holding. "Apex Holdings is not his company," I told the officer, my voice ringing clear and steady in the afternoon air. "And I have the legal documents right here to prove it." Before the officer could even reach out to take the folder from my hand, another vehicle swerved violently into my driveway, parking at a sharp angle right behind the police cruisers. It was a pristine white Range Rover. The heavy doors flew open and Eleanor stepped out, followed closely by Brittany. They must have been frantically calling Marcus after he bolted from the penthouse, and then tracked his phone location when he did not answer. Eleanor did not even pause to assess the situation or speak to her son quietly. She immediately launched into a full theatrical performance designed for maximum public exposure. She threw her hands up in the air and let out a loud wailing sob that was practically guaranteed to bring every single neighbor out onto their front porches. "Officers, please help my son," Eleanor cried out, rushing across the freshly cut lawn and grabbing the arm of the second policeman. "She is a thief. That woman standing right there is a manipulative gold digger. She hacked into my son's private business accounts and stole his entire life savings. He worked so hard to build his real estate empire, and she just took it all because she is bitter and jealous about the divorce. She is trying to leave him with absolutely nothing." The neighbors were indeed stepping out of their houses now, drawn by the loud commotion. Mr. Henderson from across the street was standing on his porch with his arms crossed, watching the spectacle unfold. Eleanor noticed the growing audience and raised her voice even louder, pointing a shaking, accusing finger directly at my face. "She has always been jealous of his incredible success." Eleanor continued, her voice trembling with highly manufactured grief. "We welcomed her into our wealthy family, and this is how she repays us, by robbing him blind right under our noses. You need to arrest her and search this entire house immediately. She is probably packing the stolen cash into suitcases right now, preparing to flee the state." I did not interrupt her dramatic monologue. I stood perfectly still on my front porch, holding my folder loosely in my hand. I let my eyes drift down to the center of the officers' chests. Both of them were wearing standard-issue body cameras, and the small red lights were blinking steadily, indicating they were actively recording. They were capturing every single word, every false accusation of a federal crime, every dramatic lie and slanderous statement. I was more than happy to let Eleanor dig a massive legal hole for herself and her son. Then Brittany stepped forward, playing her absolute favorite role of the rational, educated peacemaker. She smoothed down her expensive designer dress and offered the lead officer a warm, highly sympathetic smile. She completely ignored the horrifying reality that she was currently sleeping with her husband's own brother and seamlessly adopted the persona of a concerned family member trying to manage a volatile situation. "Officer, if I may speak to you for just a moment," Brittany said, her voice soft and coated in a thick layer of privileged condescension. "I am his sister-in-law. We are all just incredibly stressed and worried right now. Maya has been under a severe amount of emotional strain since Marcus asked for a divorce. She has been acting very erratically lately, very aggressive and deeply unpredictable." Brittany took a small step closer to the officer, lowering her voice, as if she was sharing a delicate private medical secret. "We were so afraid something terrible like this might happen. She just could not handle the fact that Marcus was moving on to a better, healthier life without her. So she lashed out in anger. She maliciously hacked his corporate accounts just to hurt him and ruin his future. I know she looks calm right now, but she has a history of these angry, unpredictable outbursts. You really need to detain her before she does something dangerous to herself or the children inside that house." It was an absolute masterclass in psychological gaslighting and racial microaggressions. Brittany was using every ugly stereotype she could weaponize, trying to paint me as the angry, unstable black woman, while positioning herself and Marcus as the innocent, terrified victims. She genuinely thought her blonde hair, her soft voice, and her expensive clothes would make the police automatically believe her over the woman standing quietly on her own front porch. The lead officer listened patiently to both of them without interrupting. He looked at Marcus, who was still breathing heavily and glaring at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Then he looked at Eleanor, who was wiping invisible tears from her cheeks. Finally, he looked back at Brittany, who gave him one last pleading, sympathetic nod. The officer did not immediately reach for his handcuffs. He was a seasoned professional who had likely responded to hundreds of messy domestic disputes and neighborhood screaming matches. He turned his attention back to me. The expression on his face was completely neutral, but I could clearly see a flicker of intelligence and curiosity in his eyes. I had not shouted back. I had not cried. I had not thrown wild insults. I had just let them scream their frantic accusations into the open air while the cameras rolled. "Mom," the officer said, his voice steady and commanding, cutting through the lingering noise. "They are making some very serious allegations of financial theft and corporate cybercrimes. You stated earlier that you have legal documents to prove otherwise. I need to see those documents right now so we can figure out what is really going on here." I smiled politely and held out the manila folder toward him. "I was waiting for you to ask, officer," I replied smoothly, stepping forward. "Please read the second page very carefully. It is going to clear up this entire ridiculous misunderstanding." The lead officer took the manila folder from my hands. He opened it slowly, scanning the top document. It was the state registration for Apex Holdings. I watched his eyes move across the page, absorbing the undeniable legal facts. He saw my name clearly printed as the sole president and sole shareholder. He flipped to the finalized divorce decree Marcus forced on me 24 hours ago. I had taken the liberty of highlighting the specific asset forfeiture clause in bright yellow marker. Whoever legally owns the company entity retains all assets. Below that was Marcus' arrogant signature legally binding him to the terms. The officer read the highlighted section twice. His eyebrows drew together in a tight line. His tension vanished, replaced by professional irritation. He closed the folder and handed it back to me with a respectful nod. He turned slowly on his heels to face Marcus. The officer's expression had hardened into a look of absolute zero tolerance. "Sir," the officer said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy, "I just reviewed the corporate registration and a signed legal divorce decree dated yesterday. This woman is the sole legal owner of Apex Holdings. Furthermore, you signed a binding legal document, specifically surrendering any and all claims to assets held by her corporate entity." Marcus' jaw dropped open. He looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. "No, you do not understand," Marcus stammered, taking a step toward the officer. "That was my money. I earned all of it. She tricked me into signing that paper. It is fraud." The officer held up a stern hand, stopping Marcus in his tracks. "She did not steal anything, sir," the officer stated firmly. "You cannot steal money from a company you completely own. You signed it all over to her willingly. This is entirely a civil matter. If you believe you were defrauded during your divorce settlement, you need to contact your attorney and take it up with a family court judge. The police department does not intervene in contract disputes, and we certainly do not arrest people for withdrawing their own legal funds." Eleanor let out a loud, dramatic gasp, clutching her chest. "But, officer, she is a gold digger," Eleanor wailed, pointing at me again. "You have to do something." "Mom, I suggest you keep your voice down," the officer warned, shooting Eleanor a sharp look that instantly silenced her. "Your son made a very serious false accusation today. Filing a false police report and wasting municipal resources is a criminal offense. I strongly advise all of you to tread very carefully right now." Brittany took a nervous step back, her perfect posture crumbling. She looked at Marcus with wide, panicked eyes, realizing that her wealthy meal ticket was actually completely broke, and now on the verge of being arrested. Marcus clenched his fists, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He looked at me standing calmly on the porch and let out a guttural scream of pure frustration. He lunged forward as if he was going to charge past the officers and attack me. Both police officers immediately stepped in his path. The lead officer rested his hand firmly on his utility belt. "Step back right now, sir," the officer commanded loudly, his voice echoing across the quiet suburban street. "Do not take another step toward this house. According to the property agreement in the very same divorce decree you provided, your ex-wife has exclusive possession of this residence for another 24 hours while she packs her belongings. That means you are currently trespassing on a property you have no legal right to access today." Marcus froze, his chest heaving violently. "You are kicking me off my own property," he yelled, his voice cracking in disbelief. "I am ordering you to leave this premises immediately," the officer corrected, stepping closer to Marcus to physically intimidate him back toward the driveway. "If you do not get into your vehicle and drive away right now, I will put you in handcuffs for trespassing and filing a false report. I will not ask you a second time." The entire neighborhood was watching. Mr. Henderson from across the street was openly shaking his head in amusement. Marcus looked at the officers and then looked back at me. I offered him a small, polite wave. The sheer humiliation of being threatened with arrest on his own front lawn in front of his mother, his mistress, and his neighbors finally broke his arrogant spirit. Marcus turned around and stomped down the concrete walkway. He practically shoved Eleanor out of his way to get to his car. Brittany hurried after him, her expensive heels clicking frantically against the pavement. The grand intimidation tactic failed spectacularly, leaving them with nothing but public shame. As Marcus sped away from my house, his mind must have been a chaotic mess of rage and desperation. He had lost his money, his pride, and his power all in the span of a few hours. The grand intimidation tactic failed spectacularly, leaving them with nothing but public shame. Brittany, sitting in the passenger seat of his car, was likely panicking about her own future now that her wealthy meal ticket was completely bankrupt. They needed leverage. They needed something they could use to force me into handing the millions back to them. They could not use the police, and they could not use the bank. So they decided to cross the absolute lowest line possible. They decided to weaponize my children. Oak Ridge Preparatory Academy was a prestigious private elementary school located just a few miles from our neighborhood. It had a strict security protocol, but Marcus was a well-known figure there. He was the wealthy father who donated to the athletic funds and drove luxury cars to the holiday assemblies. He knew the principal, Mr. Davis, personally. Marcus and Brittany arrived at the front office of the school just after lunch. Marcus slammed the heavy stack of divorce papers onto the reception desk, demanding to see the principal immediately. When Mr. Davis stepped out of his office, Marcus launched into a completely fabricated and highly dramatic story. He claimed that I had suffered a massive psychotic break that morning. He told the principal that I was acting violently, destroying property, and threatening to flee the state with the children. Brittany stood right beside him, nodding solemnly and wiping fake tears from her eyes, playing the role of the deeply concerned aunt who just wanted to protect the innocent kids. Marcus pointed to the divorce decree, claiming he was granted emergency full custody for the safety of my son and daughter. It was a bold and terrifying lie designed to manipulate the school administration into pulling Leo and Mia out of their classrooms right that second. Mr. Davis was a cautious man. He asked Marcus to wait in the office while he reviewed the paperwork and consulted with the school legal counselor. But Marcus and Brittany made one fatal miscalculation. They forgot that I was the parent who actually showed up to the parent-teacher conferences. I was the one who volunteered at the bake sales, chaperoned the field trips, and helped with the reading programs. I had built genuine relationships with the staff. One of those staff members was Mrs. Evans, my son's second-grade teacher. She happened to be making copies in the main office when Marcus was shouting his lies. She heard every single slanderous word. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter while I was taping a moving box shut. I answered it, expecting the moving company to confirm their arrival time for tomorrow. Instead, I heard the hushed, frantic voice of Mrs. Evans. "Maya, you need to get to the school right now," she whispered urgently, her voice tight with panic. "Your ex-husband is in the front office with a blonde woman. They are telling Mr. Davis that you are mentally unstable, and they are trying to take Leo and Mia out of class. Marcus is demanding they release the children to him immediately." A wave of pure, primal protective fury washed over me. You can attack my character and you can try to steal my money, but you absolutely do not involve my children in your desperate games. I thanked Mrs. Evans, grabbed my keys, and sprinted out the door. I did not bother locking the house. I jumped into my car and broke several speed limits, making the 10-minute drive to the school in less than 5. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was entirely focused on getting to my kids before Marcus could traumatize them. I threw my car into park in the fire lane right in front of the main entrance. I did not care about a parking ticket. I pushed through the heavy glass double doors of the school and walked straight into the main reception area. The front office was completely tense. Mr. Davis was standing behind the reception desk, looking extremely uncomfortable, holding a phone to his ear as if he was about to call the police. Marcus was pacing back and forth, furiously pointing at his watch, while Brittany stood by the door, looking incredibly impatient. They both froze the second I walked into the room. I did not look like a woman having a psychotic break. I looked like a mother who was ready to go to war. I walked directly past Marcus, ignoring him completely, and walked right up to the principal. "Hello, Mr. Davis," I said, my voice dangerously calm and echoing off the tiled walls. "I understand there is a desperate man in your office attempting to unlawfully kidnap my children using falsified legal documents. Let us clear this up right now." I reached into my bag, pulled out a manila envelope, and slid the certified custody agreement across the reception desk. As you can see, Mr. Davis, this document was signed by a family court judge yesterday morning. I explained, my voice steady. I retain primary physical custody of Leo and Mia. My ex-husband has absolutely no legal authority to remove them from this campus, especially not in the middle of the school day under false pretenses. Marcus' face twisted with unhinged rage. She is lying, he yelled, slamming his flat hand violently against the reception counter. She is having a severe mental breakdown right now. Do not listen to her, Davis. I am their father, and I demand you bring my kids out here. Mr. Davis adjusted his glasses and carefully looked at the raised certified seal on my legal document. Then he looked at the crumpled, uncertified papers Marcus had thrown on the desk earlier. Mr. Brooks, the principal said, his voice dropping to a stern, professional warning tone. I am going to ask you to leave this campus immediately. If you do not walk out those front doors right now, I will have the school resource officer escort you off the property, and I will personally press charges against you for causing a disturbance. Marcus glared at the principal, his chest heaving under his wrinkled suit, but he knew he had lost this battle. The school security guard was already stepping out of a nearby office. Marcus turned and stormed out, pushing the heavy glass doors open so violently they banged loudly against the brick exterior. Brittany hurried right after him, casting one last venomous look in my direction. I thanked Mr. Davis for his vigilance and assured him the children were perfectly safe to finish their school day. I walked out of the building a few moments later, fully expecting Marcus and Brittany to be gone. Instead, they were waiting for me in the sweltering school parking lot. And they were not alone. Eleanor had arrived in her white Range Rover and was standing next to Marcus, looking like she was ready for a street fight. The second my shoes hit the asphalt, the verbal assault began. You think you are so incredibly smart? Maya Marcus spat, taking an aggressive step toward me. You think you can just embarrass me in front of the police and the school principal and get away with it? You might have stolen my money today, but I will drag you through family court until you are begging on the streets. I will make sure a judge sees exactly what kind of manipulative psycho you really are. I did not flinch at his threats. Your money is legally mine, Marcus, I reminded him, keeping my expression perfectly blank. And no judge in this state is going to grant custody to a broke, unemployed man who just tried to kidnap his own kids using fake documents. That is when Brittany stepped forward. She placed a restraining hand on Marcus' chest, playing the role of his fierce, devoted protector. She looked me up and down with absolute blistering disgust. You are so pathetic, Maya Brittany sneered. You are desperately clinging to his money because you have absolutely nothing else going for you. But you are forgetting one very important detail. You cannot buy a real family. Brittany reached down and very deliberately placed both of her perfectly manicured hands over her flat stomach. She smoothed the fabric of her designer dress and lifted her chin, her blue eyes shining with malicious triumph. I am pregnant, Maya, she announced, her voice ringing sharply across the parking lot. I am carrying Marcus' child, his first real child. Eleanor let out a joyful, dramatic gasp and clapped her hands together, completely ignoring the deeply disturbing reality that her son was having a baby with his own brother's wife. Oh, Brittany, that is the most wonderful news, Eleanor gushed, stepping forward to wrap her arms around Brittany's shoulders. She beamed with overwhelming pride, looking at her new white daughter-in-law, as if she had just won the lottery. Eleanor turned her gaze back to me, her expression instantly souring into pure, unfiltered contempt. Do you hear that, Maya? She taunted, pointing a finger at me. Marcus is finally going to have a proper family. A child born to a sophisticated woman who actually belongs in our high society world. Your kids are just going to have to get used to taking a back seat. Brittany is going to give him a brilliant, beautiful baby, and they are going to raise it in a gorgeous penthouse. You and your children will be lucky if you end up in a cheap duplex on the bad side of town. The sheer cruelty of a grandmother dismissing her own flesh and blood simply because she preferred the racial and social status of her sons' mistress was staggering. Brittany stood there, rubbing her stomach, glowing with arrogant satisfaction. She genuinely believed this pregnancy was her ultimate trump card. She thought she was rubbing my nose in my own tragic defeat. She did not realize I had already set the timer on the bomb that was about to blow her entire life to pieces. I looked at Brittany rubbing her stomach and allowed a slow, cold smile to spread across my face. A complete family, I repeated, my voice laced with dark amusement. Let us ask Derek exactly how he feels about your brand new complete family. Marcus frowned, looking confused and irritated. What does my brother have to do with this? He snapped, taking another aggressive step toward me. Before I could answer, the harsh screech of heavy tires tearing across the school parking lot echoed through the humid afternoon air. A dark gray SUV swerved wildly around the corner and slammed on the brakes, stopping mere inches away from Eleanor's pristine white Range Rover. The driver's side door flew open and Derek stepped out. He did not look like the quiet, cautious man Brittany had described earlier. He looked like a man who had just had his entire reality violently ripped apart. His expensive tie was loosened, his hair was a messy tangle, and his eyes were wild with absolute devastation. In his right hand he gripped a thick, padded envelope. I had paid a private courier to deliver that envelope directly to his office desk, precisely 2 hours ago. It contained high-resolution photographs I had hired a private investigator to take weeks ago, along with copies of the confidential maternity clinic files they had carelessly left sitting openly on Marcus' home office desk. Derek marched across the hot asphalt, ignoring me completely. His eyes were locked entirely onto his wife and his younger brother. Brittany dropped her hands from her stomach, as if she had been burned by fire. All the arrogant color drained from her perfect face, leaving her chalk white and visibly trembling. "Derek, what are you doing here?" she stammered, taking a terrified, clumsy step backward. Derek stopped 3 feet away from them. He raised the padded envelope and hurled it violently at Marcus' chest. The heavy packet hit Marcus hard, causing a thick stack of glossy photographs and clinic receipts to spill out and scatter across the black pavement. "You lying piece of trash!" Derek roared, his voice cracking with raw agony. "My own brother! You slept with my wife in my own house. You got her pregnant while I was away working 70-hour weeks to provide a perfect life for her." Marcus looked down at the damning photos of him and Brittany, kissing intimately outside the luxury penthouse building. He swallowed hard, taking a defensive step back. "Derek, listen to me, man," Marcus pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. "It is not what it looks like. We did not mean for this to happen. It just happened. We fell in love." "You fell in love," Derek repeated, screaming the words so loudly that a few parents waiting in their cars rolled up their windows in shock. "You are a monster, Marcus. And you, Brittany, you are a repulsive parasite. You stood in my kitchen this morning and kissed me goodbye knowing you were carrying his child." Brittany burst into frantic, panicked tears, reaching out desperately for her husband. "Derek, please let us go home and talk about this," she begged, her voice high and pathetic. "I can explain everything." "I am so sorry. Do not touch me," Derek shouted, recoiling from her outstretched hands as if she were a disease. "My lawyer is already filing the divorce papers as we speak." "You broke the infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement, Brittany. You are getting absolutely nothing from me. I want your bags packed and out of my house by tonight." Eleanor, who had been standing in shocked silence, suddenly stepped forward. Instead of comforting her devastated older son, she instinctively moved to shield her golden child. "Derek, please calm down," Eleanor urged, placing a comforting hand on Marcus' arm. "You are making a terrible scene in public. People make mistakes, Derek. Marcus is going through a very hard divorce right now, and he needed comfort. You cannot just abandon your family over a mistake. The baby is still your nephew. We have to figure out a way to make this work to protect the family reputation." Derek stared at his mother, his expression morphing from heartbreaking sadness to absolute crushing disgust. He looked at her hand resting protectively on the arm of the man who had just destroyed his marriage. You are defending him, Derek whispered, shaking his head slowly. He sleeps with my wife. He gets her pregnant, and you are telling me to calm down and protect his reputation. You have always enabled his toxic behavior, Mom. But this is completely unforgivable. You are just as sick as he is. Derek took a deep, shuddering breath, stepping back from his mother. I have no family, he declared, his voice dropping to a cold, dead tone. I have no brother, and I have no mother. Do not ever call my phone again. If any of you step foot on my property, I will have you arrested for trespassing. Derek turned around and walked back to his SUV, leaving the scattered photographs blowing across the hot parking lot. He got into his car, threw it into reverse, and sped out of the school gates without looking back. The silence that fell over the remaining 3 people was heavy and suffocating. The grand, arrogant alliance they had formed against me had completely shattered in a matter of seconds. Brittany was sobbing uncontrollably, sinking down onto the asphalt, trying to gather the humiliating photos. Marcus was staring blankly at the empty space where his brother's car used to be entirely ruined and isolated. Eleanor stood frozen, looking down at her perfect golden boy, who was now completely broke, disgraced, and cut off from the only respectable family member he had left. I did not say another word to any of them. I simply turned around and walked calmly back toward the school entrance to wait for the final dismissal bell. 10 minutes later, I walked out of the side doors holding Leo and Mia safely by their hands. We walked right past the parking spot where Marcus and Brittany were now arguing bitterly with Eleanor. My children climbed happily into the back seat of my car, completely unaware of the absolute destruction their father had brought upon himself. I buckled my seatbelt, started the engine, and drove my family safely back home, leaving the toxic wreckage far behind in my rearview mirror. My peace only lasted for exactly 3 days. Marcus was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always make reckless, desperate moves. He could not accept that he had legally handed over his fortune, so he found someone willing to feed his delusion. He managed to secure a massive line of credit to hire Richard Sterling, one of the most ruthless shark attorneys in the entire state. Sterling was famous for destroying lives in family court, and Marcus pointed him directly at me. On Thursday morning, David called me with urgent news. Marcus had filed an emergency injunction against me, claiming fraudulent inducement during our divorce settlement. He was officially petitioning the judge to freeze all of my offshore accounts, reverse the asset transfer, and throw me in federal prison for corporate theft. He was completely unhinged, but the legal threat was very real. I dressed carefully for the emergency hearing that afternoon. I chose a simple tailored navy blue suit, holding my head high as I walked up the wide stone steps of the county courthouse. David walked right beside me, carrying a thick leather briefcase containing the absolute destruction of my ex-husband. We pushed through the heavy wooden double doors and walked down the long marble hallway toward courtroom number 4. The air inside the building was cold and smelled like old paper and floor wax. As we turned the corner, I saw Marcus waiting on the wooden bench outside the courtroom. He was not alone. Sterling, his high-priced shark attorney, stood next to him, aggressively scrolling through a tablet. Marcus stood up the second he saw me approaching. He had somehow managed to buy a brand-new charcoal gray suit, and he wore it like armor. He completely ignored the catastrophic humiliation he had suffered in the school parking lot just days earlier. His brother had disowned him, his mistress was publicly shamed, and his mother was devastated, but Marcus was still clinging to his toxic arrogance. He puffed out his chest and walked directly into my path, blocking the hallway. David immediately stepped forward to intervene, but I held up my hand, stopping my lawyer. I wanted to hear exactly what Marcus had to say. "You look nervous, Maya," Marcus whispered, his voice dripping with venomous confidence. "You should be. You actually thought you could pull a fast one on me and steal my life. You thought you could take my $15 million and just walk away clean. Well, the game is completely over today. Sterling is going to tear your little offshore trust apart piece by piece. We have filed criminal charges for fraud and deceit. When the judge sees how you manipulated those documents, you are going to be handcuffed right there at the defense table." I looked at him without blinking. My silence only made him more eager to brag. He leaned in closer, invading my personal space. "And just to make sure you know exactly how outmatched you are, let me tell you a little secret," Marcus sneered softly. "I play golf with Judge Peterson every single month at the country club. He is the one presiding over this emergency hearing. He already knows what kind of vindictive, unstable woman you are. I made sure of that. He is going to reverse the settlement, return my money, and grant me full custody of the kids while you rot in a jail cell. Say goodbye to Leo and Mia, because you are never going to see them again." It was a terrifying threat designed to break my spirit right before walking into a high-stakes legal battle. He wanted me to enter that courtroom trembling with fear. He wanted me to look guilty and frantic in front of his golfing buddy judge. I simply smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that completely unsettled him. "You should focus on telling the truth under oath today, Marcus," I replied, my voice perfectly calm. "Because perjury is a very serious federal offense, and your new suit is not going to look very good in a prison cell." Marcus frowned, his arrogant smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. Before he could respond, the heavy oak door of the courtroom swung open. The bailiff stepped out and announced that Judge Peterson was ready to hear the emergency injunction. Marcus sneered at me one last time, adjusting his expensive silk tie, before marching confidently into the room with his shark attorney. David looked directly at me and offered a reassuring nod. He whispered softly that we had absolutely nothing to worry about today, because the physical evidence we brought was entirely bulletproof. We walked slowly into the cold, quiet courtroom, together, fully ready to spring the massive trap Marcus had so perfectly set for himself. We took our seats at the solid oak defense table. The courtroom was almost completely empty except for a few clerks and a court reporter typing quietly on her machine. Marcus and Sterling sat at the plaintiff's table across the aisle. Marcus was leaning back in his chair trying to look relaxed, but his foot was tapping nervously against the carpet. The heavy wooden door behind the bench opened, and Judge Peterson walked in. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern, exhausted expression. He struck his wooden gavel once and formally called the emergency hearing to order. Sterling stood up immediately, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He launched into a highly dramatic opening statement, painting a vivid picture of a devastating financial crime committed by a bitter, jealous ex-wife. He claimed I had maliciously hacked into Marcus' private corporate accounts and stolen $15 million, leaving his innocent client completely destitute overnight. Judge Peterson listened intently, his eyes darting toward me with clear disapproval. I did not react to the glaring. I simply pulled a yellow legal pad from my briefcase, picked up my pen, and waited. "Your Honor." Sterling said, his voice echoing loudly in the large, quiet room. "I would like to call my client, Marcus Brooks, to the stand." Marcus stood up immediately and walked confidently to the wooden witness box. He placed his right hand on the Bible and swore to tell the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. It was a deeply ironic moment considering the massive calculated perjury he was about to commit. He sat down, adjusted the small black microphone, and looked respectfully up at the judge. Sterling paced back and forth in front of the witness box, creating a theatrical rhythm for the questioning. "Mr. Brooks, can you please tell the court about your professional background?" Sterling asked, his tone gentle and guiding, like he was speaking to a traumatized victim. Marcus cleared his throat and leaned closer to the microphone. "I am a self-made commercial real estate broker, Your Honor." Marcus began, his voice trembling slightly with highly manufactured emotion. "I grew up with nothing. I worked 70-hour weeks for the last decade to build my business from the ground up. I sacrificed sleep, vacations, and personal time to provide a beautiful, luxurious life for my family. I built a company called Apex Holdings, which held all of my life savings and my business capital. It was my legacy. It was everything I had worked for my entire adult life." Sterling nodded sympathetically, pausing to let the emotional weight of the words settle into the room. And can you describe your ex-wife's contribution to this successful business, Mr. Brooks? Marcus let out a heavy, dramatic sigh. Absolutely nothing, he said, shaking his head sadly. Maya stayed at home. I provided everything for her. She never understood the immense pressure I was under to succeed. When our marriage started falling apart recently, I tried to be generous. I offered her a fair settlement to walk away quietly. But she was angry. She wanted to destroy me simply because I was successful. Judge Peterson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the high mahogany bench. Mr. Brooks, what exactly happened the day after your divorce was finalized? The judge asked, directly taking control of the questioning. Marcus looked up at the judge, his eyes wide and perfectly innocent. Your Honor, she hacked into my company, Marcus said, his voice cracking at the exact right moment. She used to do some basic bookkeeping for me years ago. She must have stolen my administrative passwords and kept them hidden. The day after she signed our divorce agreement, I went to the bank to pay the lease on a new apartment. My card was declined. I checked my accounts and realized she had unlawfully transferred all $15 million of my corporate funds into an offshore trust. She wiped me out completely. She took the money I earned for my children's future just to punish me. Marcus actually managed to squeeze a single tear out of his left eye. He wiped it away quickly, playing the part of the stoic, betrayed father, to absolute perfection. Sterling looked at the judge, shaking his head in feigned disgust at my supposed crimes. It is a clear case of fraudulent inducement and grand larceny, Your Honor, Sterling stated loudly, turning to point an accusing finger at me. She signed the divorce decree in bad faith, knowing she was planning to execute this massive cyber theft the very next day. We are asking the court to immediately freeze her accounts, reverse the stolen funds, and hold her in contempt. Judge Peterson nodded slowly, his expression hardening into pure ice as he looked directly at me. He was clearly buying every single word of Marcus' theatrical performance. The judge had likely dealt with bitter divorces before, but a $15 million cyber theft was a major criminal escalation. He saw Marcus as the hard-working victim, and me as the vindictive criminal mastermind. I sat at the defense table, furiously taking notes on my yellow pad. I was documenting every single lie, every false claim, and every piece of perjury Marcus was happily cementing into the official court record. David sat right next to me, completely silent. He did not object to a single question. He did not interrupt Sterling's dramatic performance. He just let Marcus keep talking, letting the arrogant fool weave a web of lies so incredibly thick he would never be able to escape it. We were perfectly content to let him play the victim because the trap was finally set. Sterling paced back toward the plaintiff table and picked up a heavy financial ledger. He turned back to face the witness box, holding the ledger up for the judge to see. Mr. Brooks, let us discuss the specific funds that were stolen. Sterling began, his voice projecting authority. You mentioned a company called Apex Holdings. Can you explain to the court the exact nature of this company and why it contained $15 million of your personal wealth? Marcus sat up a little straighter, adjusting his expensive tie. He loved talking about his money. It was the only thing that gave him true confidence. Apex Holdings is a private limited liability company I established to manage my high-level real estate investments, Marcus explained proudly. Over the last 5 years, my career absolutely exploded. I was closing massive commercial deals, earning 7-figure commissions on a regular basis. But I realized very early on that my marriage was entirely unstable. Maya was contributing nothing to our household, and I knew eventually we would end up exactly where we are today, getting a messy divorce. Sterling nodded slowly, pretending to sympathize. And how did that realization affect your financial planning? Mr. Brooks, Sterling asked, guiding him right into the danger zone. Marcus leaned forward, resting his arms on the wooden railing of the witness box. His ego completely took over the rational part of his brain. He wanted everyone in the room to know just how incredibly smart he was. Well, I am a businessman, Your Honor, Marcus bragged, directing his attention entirely to Judge Peterson. I know exactly how family court works in this state. I know that usually a spouse is entitled to half of all marital assets. But I completely earned that money by myself. I was not going to let a lazy housewife walk away with millions of dollars of my hard-earned cash. So I developed a very strategic legal shield to protect my fortune. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Peterson lowered his pen and looked at Marcus with a sudden sharp intensity. Sterling seemed to realize his client was straying entirely off script and hastily held up his hand. "So you use the company for standard business asset protection?" Sterling interrupted, trying to soften the arrogant confession. But Marcus was too busy showing off to catch his own lawyer's desperate hint. No, it was much more brilliant than that. Marcus boasted, a smug, satisfied smile spreading across his face. "Standard asset protection is vulnerable to court subpoenas and financial audits." I went a huge step further. Every time I received a massive commission check, I never deposited it into our joint checking account. I completely bypassed our personal family finances and funneled every single penny directly into the Apex Holdings corporate accounts. For 5 straight years, I purposefully kept my personal banking balances extremely low. I essentially made myself look flat broke on personal paper, while I secretly built a $15 million empire inside the untouchable corporate shell. I knew that when the divorce papers were eventually drawn up, she would have absolutely no idea the massive fortune even existed. The court reporter was typing frantically, capturing every single arrogant syllable for the official transcript. I sat at the defense table, keeping my face completely blank, but inside I was cheering. He was doing all the heavy lifting for us. He was sitting under oath on a federal witness stand, openly confessing to premeditated financial fraud and the deliberate illegal concealment of marital assets. Judge Peterson leaned heavily over the high mahogany bench, his silver eyebrows pulling together in deep disbelief. "Let me make sure I am understanding your testimony correctly." "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his voice completely devoid of any previous sympathy, "are you testifying under oath that you deliberately and systematically funneled marital funds into a separate corporate entity for the specific purpose of hiding those assets from your wife in the event of a legal divorce?" Marcus nodded vigorously, completely oblivious to the severe legal gravity of his admission. "Exactly, Your Honor," Marcus agreed, looking incredibly proud of his own deception. "I successfully protected my wealth from her greedy hands. And then I had my lawyers draft a bulletproof divorce settlement that specifically stated whoever owned the corporate entities got to keep 100% of the assets inside them. I forced her to sign it. She agreed to take nothing. But then she somehow hacked my secure accounts and stole the $15 million anyway. That is exactly why she needs to go straight to jail today." Sterling suddenly looked like he wanted to sink right through the floorboards. He finally realized his arrogant client had just proudly confessed to a massive felony just to stroke his own massive ego in public. The judge stared at Marcus for a long, heavy moment, the silence in the cold courtroom growing thick and suffocating. Judge Peterson had spent decades presiding over messy, bitter divorces, but he had likely never seen a man so arrogantly confess to defrauding his own family while actively asking the court for immediate legal help. David, my lawyer, closed his leather notebook and placed his silver pen neatly on the oak table. He did not need to take any more notes. The prosecution had just handed us the entire case wrapped in a perfectly tied bow of pure, unadulterated narcissism. David stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket, preparing to dismantle Marcus Brooks once and for all. David walked slowly from behind the heavy oak defense table. He carried only a single piece of paper. He approached the wooden witness box where Marcus was sitting. Marcus leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at David with absolute contempt, fully expecting a desperate screaming match. Instead, David offered a polite, professional smile. "Mr. Brooks." David began, his voice smooth and completely unbothered. "I am not going to ask you about the $15 million. I only have one very simple topic I would like to discuss with you today." Marcus narrowed his eyes. Get on with it, he snapped. David handed the single piece of paper to the bailiff, who quickly passed it up to Marcus. Mr. Brooks, could you please examine the document? David asked. Do you recognize it? Marcus snatched the paper. Of course I recognize it, he scoffed loudly. It is the final page of the divorce decree, the one your client signed because she knew she had no legal ground to fight me. And is that your exact signature at the bottom? David asked, pointing at the ink. Marcus puffed out his chest. Yes, that is my own signature, he confirmed proudly. I signed it right in front of you. David nodded slowly, pacing a few steps away. Excellent. Now, Mr. Brooks, I would like to direct your attention to the second page of that document. Specifically look at Section 4, Clause B. Do you see it? Marcus flipped the page over aggressively, scanning the dense legal text. I see it, he answered, his voice dripping with impatience. For the benefit of the court and the official record, David said, turning back to face Marcus. Could you please read Section 4, Clause B aloud? Read it clearly so there is absolutely no confusion about the terms you demanded my client agree to. Sterling shifted uncomfortably at the plaintiff table, leaning forward. Marcus, however, felt no such hesitation. He grabbed the microphone and pulled it closer, eager to prove how legally bulletproof his strategy was. It says both parties hereby permanently surrender, forfeit, and waive any and all claims, rights, or financial interests to any corporate entity, limited liability company, or business holdings legally registered under the opposing party name. Marcus read, his voice echoing loudly. Furthermore, whoever is listed as the sole legal owner of said company entity retains 100% of its assets, and the opposing party waives all rights to dispute this ownership. Marcus dropped the paper back onto the wooden ledge. He looked directly at me and flashed a massive, arrogant smirk. He thought he was reading my death sentence. Yes, I demanded that clause, Marcus added, leaning toward the microphone again. And Apex is my company. I built it. I funded it. By signing this document, she legally admitted she had no right to my business. And then she stole $15 million from it anyway. She is a thief. David did not jump up to defend my honor. He simply let Marcus' arrogant words hang in the cold courtroom air. Judge Peterson looked down at Marcus, his expression unreadable, and then turned his attention back to David, waiting for the counterattack. Thank you for reading that so clearly, Mr. Brooks. David said, his voice dangerously quiet. You have established under oath that whoever is legally registered as the owner of the company retains 100% of the assets. You fully understand and agree to these terms. Of course I agree to them, Marcus snapped. I wrote them. David turned his back on Marcus and walked slowly toward the judge bench. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a thick sealed envelope. Your Honor, David said, holding the envelope up. At this time, the defense would like to request permission to submit Exhibit A into evidence for immediate review by the court. Sterling jumped up from his chair, his panic finally breaking through. Objection, Your Honor, Sterling shouted. We have not been provided with a copy of this exhibit during discovery. This is an emergency hearing. We cannot allow surprise evidence to be introduced. David remained perfectly calm. Your Honor, this is not surprise evidence, David countered smoothly. This is a publicly available state-registered document regarding the exact corporate entity the plaintiff just testified about. It is the original founding charter and state registration for Apex Holdings. It speaks directly to the ownership claims Mr. Brooks just made under oath today. Judge Peterson looked at Sterling, who was visibly sweating, and then back to David. The objection is overruled, Judge Peterson stated firmly, striking his gavel. I am formally going to allow it. Bailiff, please take this and distribute copies. Let us see exactly what this legal document says. The bailiff took the sealed envelope from David and quickly distributed the copies. He handed one directly to Judge Peterson and another to Sterling at the plaintiff table. David turned toward the court clerk sitting near the bench and politely requested that Exhibit A be displayed on the large digital monitors mounted on the courtroom walls. A few seconds later, the bright screens flickered to life. Projected in crisp, high definition for everyone to see was the official state founding charter for Apex Holdings. Marcus stared up at the screen, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. He did not immediately understand why his own corporate paperwork was being used as a weapon against him. He leaned closer to the microphone, crossing his arms defiantly. "Mr. Brooks, please look at the document displayed on the monitors," David instructed, walking back to the center of the room. "Can you confirm for the court that this is the original legally binding founding charter for Apex Holdings?" Marcus rolled his eyes and sighed heavily. "Yes, obviously, that is the charter," Marcus replied, his tone dripping with bored condescension. "It is the company I built to hold my real estate earnings. We have already established this today." David nodded, completely ignoring the arrogant attitude. "Let us look much closer at the details of this document, Mr. Brooks. Please read the exact date of incorporation listed at the top right corner." Marcus squinted at the monitor, his eyes scanning the dense text. "It says October 12th, exactly 6 years ago," he answered dismissively. "Excellent," David said smoothly. "Now, Mr. Brooks, I want you to cast your memory back exactly 6 years to that specific month. Can you tell the court what your professional and legal financial status was at that time?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably in the wooden witness chair. His arrogant posture faltered slightly. He looked over at his attorney Sterling, hoping for an immediate objection, but Sterling was too busy frantically reading his copy of the exhibit. "I was working in real estate," Marcus answered, vaguely avoiding eye contact with David. "I was closing deals." David took a step closer to the witness box, his voice growing sharper and much more commanding. "Let me be more specific, Mr. Brooks. Were you or were you not the primary target of an active criminal investigation by the Internal Revenue Service for severe tax evasion and hiding assets?" The courtroom atmosphere instantly shifted from quiet observation to electric tension. Sterling finally jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Objection, Your Honor," Sterling shouted. "This is entirely irrelevant to the current family court proceedings. My client's past tax history has absolutely nothing to do with this divorce settlement." Judge Peterson slammed his gavel down, silencing the lawyer. "Overruled." Judge Peterson barked, his eyes locked onto Marcus. The plaintiff just testified that he created this specific company to hide marital assets. The defense has every right to examine the actual origin and legal foundation of this company. Answer the question, Mr. Brooks. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat visibly bobbing. He gripped the edges of the wooden witness box, his knuckles turning white. "Yes," he mumbled quietly, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "I was being audited by the IRS. Speak directly into the microphone, please," David prompted relentlessly. "Were you facing potential federal prison time for tax fraud 6 years ago?" "Yes," Marcus snapped loudly, his temper flaring. "But it was a misunderstanding with my accountant. I was cleared of all charges. You were cleared because of my client." David corrected, his voice echoing through the silent room. "Let us talk about Maya. Before she became the stay-at-home mother you so eagerly insulted today, what was her profession?" Marcus glared at me, sitting calmly at the defense table. "She was a senior forensic auditor," he muttered bitterly. "Precisely," David said, holding up his hands. "She was a brilliant financial auditor with a spotless record. When the federal government was preparing to indict you and freeze every single bank account you owned, who stepped in to save you from a federal prison sentence?" Marcus refused to answer. He stared fiercely at the wooden railing. "I will remind you that you are under oath, Mr. Brooks," David warned. "Did Maya not take her own personal family inheritance, her completely pristine credit score, and her own social security number to establish Apex Holdings as a brand new clean corporate entity? Did she not meticulously reconstruct your disastrous financial ledgers to appease the federal investigators and save your career?" Marcus' chest heaved as he struggled to breathe. "Yes, she helped me set up the company," Marcus finally admitted through gritted teeth. "But it was my real estate money that went into it afterward. It was my business." David took a slow, deliberate step toward the witness box. He did not raise his voice, but the absolute certainty in his tone cut through the courtroom like a razor. "Your business, Mr. Brooks." David repeated, testing the words as if they left a bad taste in his mouth. "Let us look at the legal definition of your business. Please direct your attention back to the high-definition monitor displaying Exhibit A. I want you to read the names listed under the corporate officer section of the founding charter." Marcus turned his head to look at the bright digital screen. His eyes scanned down the illuminated page. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The arrogant fire that had fueled his entire testimony suddenly extinguished, leaving behind a pale, trembling panic. "Read it aloud for the court." "Mr. Brooks," David commanded, his voice ringing with sudden authority, "whose name is legally registered as the sole president of Apex Holdings." Marcus swallowed very hard. His fingers gripped the wooden ledge of the witness box so tightly his knuckles looked like polished marble. "Maya Brooks," he whispered, his voice breaking and barely audible in the quiet freezing room. "You will need to speak up for the court reporter," David instructed, pointing toward the woman typing furiously beside them. "Maya Brooks." Marcus repeated slightly louder, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "And whose name is listed as the chief executive officer?" David asked relentlessly, not giving him a single second to recover. "Maya Brooks." Marcus answered, a thick bead of cold sweat dripping down his pale temple. "And finally, who is listed as the 100% absolute sole shareholder and registered agent for the entire corporate entity?" David demanded, stepping right up to the heavy wooden railing. Marcus closed his eyes as if he could physically shut out the truth. "Maya Brooks." He said the words sounding like a heavy death sentence. David turned to look directly at Judge Peterson. "Your Honor, the state-registered founding documents clearly prove that Apex Holdings has never belonged to Marcus Brooks. He is not the president. He is not even a board member. He does not hold a single share of stock. Legally speaking, for the last 6 years, Mr. Brooks has been nothing more than an uncontracted employee, voluntarily depositing his real estate commissions into a totally private corporation. He was depositing his money into an entity completely owned and operated by his wife." Sterling jumped to his feet, his face purple with absolute outrage. "This is a technicality, Your Honor," Sterling shouted desperately, trying to save a rapidly sinking ship. "My client earned that money. He was the one bringing in the massive revenue. It was clearly understood to be his private account." "A technicality," David countered sharply, spinning around to face the opposing counsel. "We are in a court of law, Mr. Sterling. Corporate ownership is never a technicality. It is a legally binding, unbreakable, absolute fact. And your client just spent the last 20 minutes bragging under federal oath about how he intentionally funneled his marital assets into this exact company to hide them from my client." Marcus leaned frantically toward his microphone. "I did not know her name was the only one on the paper," he practically screamed, his carefully crafted victim persona completely shattering. "She handled all the paperwork 6 years ago. I just signed where she told me to sign so the IRS would back off. I assumed my name was on it. I assumed it was mine because I was earning everything." "You assume," David echoed, allowing a cold, mocking laugh to escape his lips. "You built a $15 million empire and you never once bothered to read the founding corporate charter. You were so incredibly arrogant, so utterly convinced of your own superior intelligence, that you blindly handed your entire financial existence over to the very woman you spent years treating like an uneducated servant." Marcus was hyperventilating now. He looked wildly around the courtroom, seeking a lifeline that did not exist. "But I deposited all the checks," he pleaded, his voice hitting a pathetic high pitch of absolute terror. "Every single commission I earned went straight into that account. It is my money." "No, Mr. Brooks," David said softly, delivering the final crushing blow. "It was your money the moment the real estate agency handed you the check. But the second you willfully deposited those funds into a company entirely owned by Maya Brooks, you legally gifted that money to her corporation. You freely transferred your personal wealth into her completely separate legal entity." And you did it specifically to hide those assets from the family court system. The absolute reality of his catastrophic arrogance finally hit him hard. The courtroom was no longer quiet. A low murmur erupted from the few clerks and bailiffs who had been listening to the proceedings. Even the court reporter paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes wide with shock before returning to her furious typing. Sterling collapsed back into his chair, dragging his hand down his face. He knew the case was entirely dead. There was no legal maneuvering out of a trap this perfectly constructed. David turned away from the trembling Marcus and walked back to the center of the courtroom, addressing the bench with absolute confidence. "Your Honor," David said, projecting his voice over the noise, "the plaintiff has just admitted under federal oath to hiding $15 million of marital assets during a divorce proceeding. He deliberately funneled those assets into a corporate entity that he knew or legally should have known was entirely owned by my client. Then, acting in extreme bad faith, he forced my client to sign a predatory divorce decree, a decree that he specifically drafted to ensure she would walk away with absolutely nothing." David paused, letting his eyes slide over to Marcus, who was now slouched in the witness chair, breathing in short, shallow gasps. But his own malicious greed became his undoing. David continued. "By insisting on Section 4, Clause B, the plaintiff legally and irrevocably signed over any potential claim he might have had to those funds. He thought he was building an impenetrable wall around his money. Instead, he legally gifted his entire fortune to Maya Brooks. She did not steal $15 million, Your Honor. She simply executed a lawful withdrawal from a company she has completely owned for 6 years, acting fully within her rights as the sole shareholder. Furthermore, Your Honor," David added, his tone growing even more severe, "Mr. Brooks used the threat of a prolonged custody battle to force her signature. He weaponized his perceived financial dominance. He assumed she was an uneducated housewife who would blindly submit to his abuse. But my client is a forensic auditor. She read the paperwork. She knew exactly what he was doing, and she simply let him do it. We ask this court to dismiss this ridiculous injunction immediately." Marcus gripped the microphone, his knuckles white. "You cannot let her do this," he pleaded, looking desperately up at Judge Peterson. "She tricked me. She let me believe it was my company. I earned that money. I built that empire. It is not fair. You have to reverse the contract. You have to give it back to me." Judge Peterson picked up his wooden gavel and slammed it down with a sharp, deafening crack. "Silence," the judge roared, his voice booming with absolute authority. "Do not speak another word in my courtroom, Mr. Brooks, unless you are directly spoken to." Marcus flinched, shrinking back into the wooden chair. The arrogant swagger, the tailored suit, the smug confidence, it was all completely gone. He looked like a terrified child realizing the monster in the closet was actually real. Judge Peterson leaned over the high mahogany bench, staring down at Marcus with a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. "I have sat on this bench for 22 years, the judge stated, his voice dripping with contempt. "I have presided over thousands of divorces. I have seen bitter spouses try to hide money in offshore accounts, crypto wallets, and safety deposit boxes. But I have never in my entire career seen a man so blindingly arrogant that he hides $15 million in his wife's own company and then legally forces her to keep it." The judge shook his head, tossing his silver pen onto the heavy wooden desk. "You came into my courtroom requesting an emergency injunction." Judge Peterson continued, his tone razor sharp. "You sat on that stand, took an oath before God and this court, and proudly confessed to premeditated financial fraud. You bragged about defrauding your wife. You weaponized the legal system to leave the mother of your children completely destitute. You thought you were the smartest person in the room, Mr. Brooks. But you were just playing a very stupid game, and now you have won a very stupid prize." "But Your Honor," Marcus whined, a pathetic, desperate sound escaping his throat. "I will be bankrupt. I will have absolutely nothing. You will have exactly what you intended to give your wife." The judge snapped back. "Nothing. The legal contract you forced her to sign is absolutely ironclad. You drafted it. You signed it. You agreed to the terms. This court does not exist to rescue malicious individuals from the consequences of their own toxic schemes. The court finds no evidence of fraudulent inducement on the part of the defense. Maya Brooks acted entirely within her legal rights. The money belongs to her, and this court will absolutely not interfere with that lawful transfer. Judge Peterson raised his wooden gavel high in the air and brought it down with a final echoing crack that seemed to shake the very foundation of the room. This emergency injunction is entirely dismissed with prejudice, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Furthermore, Mr. Brooks, since you have willingly provided a sworn confession of tax evasion and the deliberate concealment of assets, I am ethically and legally obligated to act. I am ordering the court clerk to immediately forward the official transcript of today's proceedings directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. You tried to use my courtroom to execute a financial crime, and now you will answer to the federal government. Marcus did not argue. He did not yell. The last remaining shred of his arrogant ego completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but a broken, terrified man. He collapsed heavily back into the wooden witness chair, pulling his knees up slightly, as if trying to physically make himself smaller. He buried his face in his trembling hands and began to weep. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was a loud, pathetic sobbing that echoed pitifully across the cold courtroom. His broad shoulders shook violently under his expensive tailored suit. He had lost his $15 million, his family, his reputation, and very soon he would likely lose his freedom. Sterling, his expensive shark attorney, did not even look at him. Sterling simply snapped his briefcase shut and walked away, entirely abandoning his ruined client. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly swung open. Brittany and Eleanor had been waiting in the hallway, listening to the entire devastating verdict through the heavy wood. Brittany walked slowly down the center aisle, her designer heels clicking softly against the floor. She did not rush forward to comfort the weeping man she claimed to love. She stood a few feet away from the witness box, staring at Marcus with absolute horror. "You are completely bankrupt," she whispered, her voice trembling with rising panic. "You have absolutely nothing left, and you are going to federal prison." Marcus looked up at her, his face red and streaked with tears. "Brittany, please," he begged, reaching a shaking hand out toward her. "We can figure this out. I can rebuild. I just need you to stand by me." Brittany let out a harsh, bitter laugh, stepping away from his outstretched hand. "I left my wealthy husband for a millionaire." She spat, her voice dripping with venomous regret. "I am not going to raise a child with a broke, convicted felon." She reached down and violently yanked the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. She threw it directly at his chest. The heavy ring bounced off his suit jacket and rolled under the defense table. "I am done, Marcus," she announced, turning her back on him completely. She marched out of the courtroom, leaving him sobbing even louder into his hands. Eleanor, however, did not leave. She practically ran down the aisle, her face pale and desperate. She completely bypassed her weeping son and rushed directly toward me as David and I were packing our briefcases. "Maya, please wait," Eleanor cried, reaching out to grab my arm. I stepped back quickly, refusing to let her touch me. Eleanor dropped her hands, clasping them together in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Maya, you cannot do this to us," she begged, her voice cracking with manufactured tears. "That money belongs to the family. You have to give at least half of it back. Marcus is going to need money for his federal defense lawyers. I will lose my house if he cannot pay my mortgage. Please, Maya, you have a good heart. You cannot just leave us with nothing." I zipped my leather briefcase shut and looked at the woman who had spent the last 7 years making my life a living hell. She was the woman who had hosted a barbecue to celebrate my divorce just days ago. Now she was begging for my charity. I looked directly into her panicked eyes. "You are absolutely right, Eleanor," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. "I do have a good heart, but my heart belongs exclusively to my children and myself. You and your son made your choices, Now you get to live with them. Enjoy the tiny apartment, Eleanor." I turned my back on her and walked confidently down the center aisle of the courtroom. David walked right beside me, offering a small, proud smile. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the bright hallway, leaving the toxic weeping remains of the Brooks family completely behind me forever as I walked away into the bright, warm afternoon sunshine. That bright, warm afternoon sunshine felt like the first real breath of air I had taken in 7 years. 6 months have passed since that incredible day in family court, and the universe has a remarkably poetic way of balancing the scales of justice. Karma did not just knock on their doors, it completely kicked their doors off the hinges. Marcus is currently working as a shift manager at a discount hardware store just outside the city limits. He wears a stiff, bright orange vest instead of tailored charcoal suits. The heavy diamond Rolex he used to flash in my face is long gone. He had to pawn it just to afford his first meeting with a bargain basement defense attorney. He spends his long, miserable days organizing shelves of plumbing supplies and getting yelled at by angry customers over expired coupons. Every single dollar he earns from his minimum wage paycheck goes directly toward fighting his federal indictments. The Internal Revenue Service did not take his arrogant courtroom confession lightly. They completely dismantled his remaining business network, audited his entire professional history, and indicted him on multiple felony charges of tax evasion and corporate fraud. He is terrified, constantly looking over his shoulder, waiting for the federal prosecutors to finalize his inevitable prison sentence. He has absolutely no power left, and his massive ego has been entirely crushed under the weight of his own criminal stupidity. Brittany learned the hard way that high society only respects you when you have a wealthy husband to fund your arrogant lifestyle. Derek successfully divorced her in record time. He ruthlessly enforced their ironclad prenuptial agreement, punishing her for the infidelity clause she so carelessly broke. He threw her out and left her with absolutely nothing. She is now a single mother living in the exact kind of tiny, cramped apartment she once gleefully told me to go pack my cheap bags for. She was forced to sell her limited edition Hermes bag on an internet resale application just to afford her security deposit and basic baby supplies. The exclusive country club immediately revoked her membership. The wealthy charity gala organizers stopped returning her calls, and her former rich friends pretend they do not see her when they cross the street. She spends her lonely nights scrolling through social media, watching the luxurious life she threw away continue perfectly fine without her. Eleanor faced the most publicly humiliating downfall of them all. Her sprawling brick house, the very same house where she threw that cruel barbecue to celebrate my supposed destruction, was foreclosed on by the bank. Marcus had been secretly paying her massive mortgage for years to keep up appearances. When his accounts hit absolute zero, the bank quickly came collecting. Eleanor tried to call Derek and beg him for financial rescue, but he immediately blocked her number and refused to speak to her. She was forced to pack up her expensive patio furniture and move into a cheap duplex on the bad side of town. The brutal irony of her new living situation is not lost on anyone who remembers the vicious, classist insults she hurled at me from her perfectly manicured lawn. She is now the exact type of poor, struggling woman she spent her entire life mocking. As for me, I am currently sitting on the expansive wooden balcony of my brand new beachfront estate. The gentle, soothing sound of the ocean waves crashing against the pristine white sand is the only music I need these days. I take a slow sip of my warm chamomile tea and watch a flock of seagulls diving over the crystal clear water. Leo and Mia are happily running along the shoreline, collecting beautiful seashells and building massive sandcastles in the afternoon sun. They are thriving at a prestigious private coastal academy where nobody knows the ugly, dramatic history of their father. They are happy, healthy, and completely shielded from the toxic chaos we left behind in that miserable suburban neighborhood. I did not just take the $15 million and hide away in the shadows. I placed the vast majority of it into secure, high-yield trusts, creating unbreakable generational wealth for my children. Then I used a small portion of my funds to launch my own boutique forensic auditing firm. I am the absolute boss now. I set my own hours, and I only accept high-profile corporate clients who respect my incredible financial expertise. I have completely reclaimed my identity, my career, and my absolute peace of mind. Every morning, I wake up in a luxurious, king-sized bed without a single ounce of anxiety or fear. I do not spend my precious energy hating Marcus or his miserable family. I simply do not think about them at all. I realized that arguing with fools and fighting with traitors only drags you down to their miserable level. The absolute greatest revenge you can ever achieve against people who tried to destroy you is massive, unbothered success. I survived their cruel betrayal. I outsmarted their arrogant traps, and I built a beautiful, wealthy life that they will never be allowed to touch. The most profound lesson woven throughout this dramatic story is that blinding arrogance is a fatal vulnerability, while emotional composure and financial literacy serve as unbreakable armor. Marcus and his family constantly relied on loud intimidation, classist privilege, and theatrical cruelty to assert their dominance. They fundamentally believed that volume and malice equated to power. However, their unchecked hubris made them incredibly lazy. Marcus was so absolutely convinced of his own unmatched superiority that he never even bothered to read the foundational legal documents he weaponized. His massive ego built a financial and legal trap that he proudly walked right into. In stark contrast, Maya never once matched their hysterical, chaotic energy. When faced with public humiliation, vicious verbal abuse, and the terrifying threat of losing her children, she refused to scream, cry, or beg. She simply stepped back and allowed her adversaries to expose their true toxic colors to the world. Her absolute emotional control allowed her to think strategically rather than react defensively. She understood a vital truth in the face of narcissistic manipulation. Profound silence and hard evidence are infinitely more effective than a desperate shouting match. Furthermore, the narrative sharply underscores the critical importance of knowing your facts. Maya's professional background was not just a convenient tool, it was the bedrock of her survival. Understanding binding contracts, corporate structures, and her own undeniable legal rights allowed her to seamlessly turn her ex-husband's malicious intent into his complete and utter ruin. She protected her children and secured generational wealth simply because she understood the fine print. Take active control of your own narrative today by educating yourself on your personal finances and legal rights, ensuring that no one can ever weaponize your own life against you.